So as you can see, or hear, we're still having a little bit of an issue with the leak. I thought it was fixed. I went for a drive and did about 45 minutes of driving before it started making noise again. So either the seal that I made on that neck isn't good enough, or we're actually looking at a problem somewhere else. Right now it's not too loud, but you can see, if you have a look in the reservoir, you can tell that the fluid's just a little bit aerated. And I'm gonna just steer a little bit and you'll see or hear what the pump is doing. So here's, we just grab the steering wheel. I've got the car jacked up so I can turn the wheels freely without them rubbing on the ground. Now obviously when I'm at full lock it's gonna make noise anyways, but you can hear the pump a little bit more now, and you know, obviously air in the fluid. So what I'm gonna do, the next step is I'm gonna start by taking off, pull the fluid out, take that reservoir off. I'm going to try and clean the screen on the reservoir really well, in case, you know, maybe that screen being clogged is causing the pump to draw a lot of pressure, a lot of vacuum on that feed line and pulling air in somewhere where it shouldn't be getting in. Could be around like one of the seals on the rubber hose or something else. You know, this is a car that's almost 20 years old, so there's a good chance that the rubber hoses might be bad too, and that could be why the pump went out in the first place. But I'm going to pull the fluid out, pull the reservoir off. As soon as I do that, I'll be able to clean that screen, clean the lines out, and at that point maybe what I'll do is actually put the reservoir back on, put the cap on, and try to pressurize the system a little bit. Normally that part of the system wouldn't be under pressure, but we'll try and, you know, just put a little bit of air to it and see if we can find some bubbles somewhere. I've gone ahead, I've removed the fluid using a fluid extractor. Now I'm going to undo these two bolts, and then there's a rubber grommet that holds a plastic pin in the bottom of the reservoir here. I'll be able to get that reservoir loose, pull it up a little bit, and disconnect the hoses, get the rest or the last little bit of fluid out, and then I'll be able to give this reservoir a good clean. What I've got now, I've got the reservoir bolts, retaining bolts out of the car. I've moved my wiring harness out of the way. Now I have access to my feed and return lines just on the bottom there. The fat one's the feed that goes to the power steering pump. The smaller diameter one is the return line coming from the power steering rack. So I'll be able to take those off, get in there with some hose clamp pliers, remove those, and get my reservoir out. So I've taken the reservoir off, given it a good clean. But while I was doing that, I decided that I should try and pump a little bit of fluid through it. So here's my kind of ghetto setup for doing that. Basically, I've got the return line hooked up to this transmission fluid funnel, and I've got the feed line hooked up to this other small funnel. I filled this with clean power steering fluid, and then I'm just going to rock the steering back and forth with the car off. And what that's going to do, it's going to pull that fluid through the system, and it's going to pump the old fluid up into this funnel, and I'll be able to suck that out with my fluid extractor. So you can see here, I'm starting to get some fluid coming out from the return line from the power steering rack, and I'm losing fluid from my feed line to the power steering pump, so I'm pushing fluid through. And you'll notice too how clean this fluid is and how kind of gross this is. Now the reason I wanted to do this setup is because when I cleaned the reservoir, the screen on the return was actually pretty scuzzy, and there was quite a bit of debris in there. So I'm just trying to flush as much of that out as I can. I'm going to suck it out of here with my extractor and keep pushing that fresh fluid through. Right now, I've pumped the fluid through the steering system just by rocking the wheel back and forth. I've brought my level of clean fluid just below the tip of the funnel there, so I can get the funnel out and get the reservoir back on without spilling too much fluid. And I've sucked up as much of the dirty fluid as I could. It was starting to come out pretty clean, so we're going to go with that. So I've hooked up my power steering lines, the feed and the return lines again, but before I finish bolting everything back together and putting the covers back on, I'm just going to run the car, move the wheel back and forth and try and get any more air out and see if I can identify anything else that might be leaking or any other spots that could be sucking air in. So when I was trying to make the video yesterday, I actually had an issue with my camera and I missed a bunch of the stuff, but basically what happened was once I got the reservoir back on the car and ran a bunch of fluid through it, I was still getting air in the system. what I ended up doing was I took a cap from another reservoir that I had on a parts car, drilled it out a little bit, put a fitting in it so I could pull vacuum into the onto the reservoir and kind of put the whole system under vacuum. So I did that. When I did, what ended up happening, I could hear a bit of air coming into one of the rubber hoses. So where the feed line to the power steering pump was, one of the hoses was old. It had a tiny little crack that I couldn't see, but it was right on the inside, and air was getting in there. So what I did was replace that section of rubber hose, and now it's good. Since then, I flushed the system out again and got all the air out. Now it's running well, so I get to drive around in my C5A6 and have a little bit of fun. So stay tuned. We'll have more videos about this car and this project going forward, and hopefully you guys enjoy it.